England, 1816. The grand ballroom of Greyhaven Estate glittered under the light of 1,000 candles. Lady Catherine Pemberton adjusted her pearl hairpin, a gift from her father on her 22nd birthday, and took a deep breath before entering the crowded chamber. The past year had been her crucible, painful, transformative, necessary. When Edmund Ashford, the Duke of Silvermere, had disappeared from her life without explanation, she thought herself destroyed beyond repair. "Lady Catherine," Lady Rothwell beamed, taking her hands, "how delightful to see you looking so well. Your gown is absolutely exquisite." Catherine smiled with practiced ease. "Thank you for your kind invitation, Lady Rothwell. Your annual spring ball is always the highlight of the season." The pale blue silk of Catherine's gown rustled softly as she moved through the crowd. Several familiar faces nodded respectfully in her direction. The music swelled, a Mozart piece she recognized from happier days, as she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman. "Might I have the honor of this dance, Lady Catherine?" She turned to find Mr. James Howard, the second son of the Earl of Bainbridge, offering his hand. His kind eyes and genuine smile had been a steady comfort in recent months. "With pleasure, Mr. Howard," she replied, setting down her untouched champagne. As they joined the other couples for the quadrille, Catherine allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had survived. The woman who had once wept until dawn, who had barely eaten for weeks, who had refused to leave her chambers, that fragile creature was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had learned to protect herself. "You seem in good spirits this evening," James commented, as they moved through the steps of the dance. "I find I have much to be thankful for," Catherine replied. She had just completed a graceful turn when the music faltered momentarily, or perhaps it was only her perception of it. A curious hush fell over one section of the ballroom, followed by excited whispers. The Duke of Silvermere had arrived. Catherine's fingers tightened involuntarily around James's hand, but her expression remained serene. Edmund stood tall and imposing in the entryway, his dark evening attire impeccable, his chestnut hair slightly longer than fashion dictated, and on his arm, resplendent in crimson silk and diamonds, was the Duchess of Harrington, beautiful, worldly, and precisely everything Catherine was not. "Are you unwell?" James asked, noticing her momentary stillness. "Merely a passing chill," Catherine lied, forcing herself to continue the dance. She would not look at Edmund. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her falter. But fate had other plans. As the dance ended and James led her from the floor, Catherine found herself directly in Edmund's line of sight. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and everything around them seemed to blur. The music faded, the chatter dimmed. For one breathless moment, there was only the two of them. His face, that perfectly composed, aristocratic face, showed a flash of something unmistakable. Pain? Regret? Catherine couldn't be certain. What she knew was that her carefully constructed defenses threatened to crumble. With every ounce of dignity she possessed, Catherine turned away. She accepted another dance invitation, from Lord Weston this time. She smiled, she conversed. She pretended that seeing Edmund had not affected her in the slightest, but her heart, her traitorous heart, thundered in her chest. Edmund remained rooted to the spot, the Duchess's words washing over him unheard. Catherine looked different, more poised, more confident. She wore her golden brown hair swept up in a more sophisticated style, revealing the elegant curve of her neck. But it was the light in her eyes, a light that had once been solely for him, now directed at others, that struck him like a physical blow. "Your Grace," the Duchess of Harrington said sharply, recalling his attention. "I believe you were about to fetch me some refreshment?" "Of course," he said automatically, though his gaze lingered on Catherine's retreating figure. "Forgive me, Elizabeth." As he made his way toward the refreshment table, Edmund was accosted by Lord Rothwell. "Silvermere, capital to see you. Wasn't certain you'd grace us with your presence this season." Edmund managed a thin smile. "I've been occupied with estate matters." Yes. Heard you've been improving the tenant cottages at Silvermere Court. Unusual interest, but commendable." Lord Rothwell lowered his voice. "I see the Willowmere girl is here. Thought that might interest you." Edmund stiffened. "Lady Catherine and I are merely acquaintances." Lord Rothwell's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Indeed, the impression last season was rather different." "Well, water under the bridge, I suppose." She seems to have captured young Howard's attention these days. Edmund's jaw tightened as he watched James Howard return to Catherine's side, offering her a glass of punch. The easy familiarity between them sent a surge of something dark through his veins. "If you'll excuse me," he said curtly, leaving Lord Rothwell mid-sentence. Across the room, Lady Helena Pemberton, Catherine's younger sister, approached with wide eyes. "Catherine," she whispered urgently, "he's here, and he keeps looking at you." "Let him look," Catherine replied, smoothing her gloves. "It matters not to me." Helena frowned. "You don't mean that, not after everything?" "Especially after everything." Catherine's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Now, tell me of your dance with Mr. Sinclair. I noticed he seemed quite attentive." As the evening progressed, Catherine and Edmund orbited each other like celestial bodies, never coming closer than propriety demanded, yet acutely aware of the other's presence. She laughed at James Howard's jokes. He escorted the Duchess around the room. Both performed their roles flawlessly, until the Duchess deliberately steered Edmund toward the corner where Catherine stood with Helena and James. "Lady Catherine," the Duchess purred, "how delightful to see you again. It's been an age." Catherine curtsied perfectly. "Your Grace, I trust you're enjoying the season." "Immensely." The Duchess's smile was predatory as she placed her hand possessively on Edmund's arm. "The Duke has been kind enough to escort me to several events. Haven't you, Edmund?" The use of his Christian name, a deliberate display of intimacy, hung in the air between them. Edmund cleared his throat. "Lady Catherine, Lady Helena." His voice, deep and familiar, sent an unwelcome shiver down Catherine's spine. "I hope you are both well." "Exceedingly," Catherine replied, her gaze level. "Mr. Howard has been regaling us with tales of his recent journey to Italy. Most fascinating." James, sensing the tension, stepped forward. "Your Grace, I believe we've not been formally introduced." James Howard. As the men exchanged pleasantries, Helena whispered in Catherine's ear, "Breathe, dear sister. You look as though you might shatter." Indeed, Catherine felt as though she might. The proximity to Edmund, his familiar scent, the timbre of his voice, threatened to unravel her composure. "If you'll excuse me," she said suddenly, "I find I need some air." Before anyone could protest, Catherine moved swiftly through the crowd toward the terrace doors. The cool night air was a blessed relief as she stepped outside, her hands gripping the stone balustrade. "Fool," she whispered to herself. "Absolute fool." A year of healing, of rebuilding, of convincing herself she was indifferent. And one look from him had set her heart racing. One proximity had made her flee. She did not hear the terrace door open behind her. "Catherine." She closed her eyes briefly at the sound of Edmund's voice. Then, composing herself, she turned. "Your Grace," she said coolly, "I believe your companion will be wondering where you've gone." Edmund took a step closer. "I needed to speak with you." "After a year of silence?" Catherine laughed bitterly. "I think not." "Please," he said, and something in his tone, a vulnerability she had never heard before, made her pause. "One moment. That's all I ask." Catherine regarded him warily. In the moonlight, his features seemed more pronounced. The high cheekbones, the strong jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes. He looked tired, she realized. Strained. "What could you possibly have to say that would interest me?" she asked. Edmund ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. I wanted to inquire after your well-being." "My well-being?" Catherine's composure slipped. "You abandoned me without a word after weeks of courtship. You made me believe." She stopped herself, unwilling to reveal how deeply he had hurt her. "My well-being is no longer your concern, Your Grace. I know I have no right to ask," he said quietly, "but I have thought of you often." "How flattering," she replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I, however, have endeavored not to think of you at all." Edmund flinched as if struck. "You seem changed." "Yes," Catherine agreed. "I am." The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken words and buried pain. "The Duchess appears a suitable match for you," Catherine said finally. "I wish you every happiness." "Elizabeth and I are not engaged," Edmund said quickly, "despite what society assumes. It hardly matters to me either way." Catherine gathered her skirts, preparing to return to the ballroom. "If you'll excuse me, I believe Mr. Howard will be wondering where I've gone." As she moved to pass him, Edmund gently caught her wrist. The touch, their first in a year, sent a jolt through them both. "Catherine, please." His voice was rough with emotion. "I made a terrible mistake." She looked down at where his fingers encircled her wrist, then back to his face. "Yes," she agreed softly. "You did." With that, she pulled away and returned to the bright lights and music of the ballroom, leaving Edmund alone in the darkness with his regrets. The day after Lady Rothwell's ball, Catherine sat in the morning room of the Pemberton townhouse, absently stirring her tea as Helena read aloud from the latest society column. Lady Catherine Pemberton, whose mysterious withdrawal from society last season prompted much speculation, has returned triumphantly to the London scene. Her elegant appearance at Lady Rothwell's ball drew many admirers, including the eligible Mr. James Howard. Helena paused dramatically. Also in attendance was the Duke of Silvermere, escorting the widowed Duchess of Harrington. Observers noted a curious tension when these former acquaintances encountered one another. "Vultures, the lot of them," Catherine muttered, setting down her cup with more force than intended. Helena folded the newspaper. "You must admit, your encounter with the Duke provides delicious fodder for gossip. I would prefer not to be discussed at all. An impossible wish for the daughter of an earl, particularly one as lovely as yourself." Helena studied her sister thoughtfully. "What did he say to you on the terrace?" Catherine sighed. "Nothing of consequence." "It didn't look like nothing." Helena leaned forward. "You were pale as a ghost when you returned." Before Catherine could respond, the butler entered with a silver salver. "A delivery for you, Lady Catherine." Upon the salver rested a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, accompanied by a sealed note. Catherine recognized Edmund's handwriting immediately, elegant, decisive strokes that had once adorned love letters she'd treasured. "Shall I open it for you?" Helena asked eagerly. "No," Catherine replied, quickly taking the package. "That will be all, Wilson." "Thank you." Once the butler had departed, Catherine broke the seal on the note. "Catherine, words cannot express my regret for the pain I have caused you. Please accept this token, not as recompense, which I know is impossible, but as a symbol of a truth I was too cowardly to acknowledge. Yours, though I have no right to be, Edmund." With trembling fingers, Catherine unwrapped the package to reveal a small leather-bound volume of Wordsworth's poetry, the same collection they had discussed during their walks in Hyde Park. Inside, a pressed forget-me-not marked a particular poem they had once read together beneath an ancient oak tree. "How terribly romantic," Helena sighed, reading over Catherine's shoulder. "Will you see him?" Catherine closed the book firmly. "Certainly not. A paltry gift changes nothing." "But, Helena, please." Catherine's voice was strained. He had his chance. He made his choice. "I will not be made a fool of twice." Yet despite her words, Catherine carefully placed the book in her desk drawer, rather than discarding it. That afternoon, a visitor was announced. Not Edmund, as part of Catherine had feared and hoped, but James Howard. "Mr. Howard," Catherine greeted him in the drawing room. "What a pleasant surprise." James bowed. "Lady Catherine, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. Helena and I were just discussing plans for the Forsyths' musicale tomorrow evening." James hesitated, then said, "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you privately, if I may." Catherine glanced at Helena, who rose with a knowing smile. "I suddenly recall urgent correspondence that requires my attention, if you'll excuse me." Once they were alone, James approached Catherine with uncharacteristic nervousness. "I'll come directly to the point, Lady Catherine. Over these past months, I've developed a deep admiration for you. Your grace, your intelligence, your resilience, all have impressed me greatly." Catherine felt a flutter of panic. "Mr. Howard, please," he said gently, "allow me to continue. I understand you suffered a disappointment last season. I have no wish to press unwelcome attentions upon you, but I would be honored if you would consider me as someone who might, in time, earn your affection." Catherine regarded him with genuine fondness. James Howard was everything Edmund was not: steady, transparent, uncomplicated. A sensible woman would accept his suit without hesitation. "You do me great honor, Mr. Howard," she said carefully, "and I value your friendship immensely. But I must be honest, my heart is not yet, that is, I cannot in good conscience encourage hopes I'm uncertain I can fulfill." Rather than disappointment, James's expression showed understanding. "I appreciate your candor. I ask only that you not dismiss the possibility entirely." "I would never wish to mislead you," Catherine said, touched by his maturity. "Then we shall continue as friends," James said, "and perhaps with time." He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. As he took his leave, Catherine felt a complex mixture of emotions. James offered safety, respect, affection. Why then did the prospect of accepting him fill her with such melancholy? Later that evening, the Earl of Willowmere summoned Catherine to his study, a rare occurrence that immediately put her on alert. "Father," she said, entering the book-lined room where he sat behind an imposing mahogany desk. "You wish to see me?" The Earl, a distinguished man in his early 60s, gestured for her to sit. "I've had a visitor today," he said without preamble. "The Duke of Silvermere." Catherine stiffened. "Indeed?" "He requested a private audience, most unusual given the circumstances." "And what did His Grace want?" Catherine asked, struggling to keep her voice even. The Earl studied his daughter carefully. "He asked for my permission to court you properly, said there had been a misunderstanding last season that he wished to rectify." "A misunderstanding?" Catherine repeated incredulously. "Is that what he calls it?" "I reminded him that he had forfeited any claim to your attention when he disappeared without explanation." The Earl's tone was severe. "I also informed him that Mr. Howard has shown serious interest in you." Catherine's cheeks flushed. "James spoke to you." "He did. A respectable young man with excellent prospects." The Earl leaned forward. "Catherine, I have never interfered in your choice of husband. Your happiness is paramount to me. But I would be remiss as a father if I did not caution you against trusting Silvermere again." "You need not worry," Catherine assured him. "I have no intention of allowing the Duke to dupe me a second time." The Earl nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I told him as much. However, he was most insistent. Said he would not rest until he had explained himself to you fully." The Earl sighed. "I confess, I have never seen a man, particularly one of his station, so determined." He mentioned something about circumstances beyond his control, though he refused to elaborate to me. Catherine's heart betrayed her with a traitorous leap. "What did you tell him?" "That the decision was yours to make." The Earl's expression softened. "You are no longer a child, Catherine. I trust your judgment, even if I fear for your heart." The following evening at the Forsyths' musicale, Catherine was acutely aware of being the subject of curious glances and whispered conversations. News of both James's interest and Edmund's visit to her father had evidently spread throughout society. She was seated between Helena and their cousin, Lady Sophia Russell, when a hush fell over the gathering. Edmund had entered the music room, alone this time, his tall figure commanding attention without effort. "Goodness," Sophia whispered, "the Duke without his Duchess. How unexpected." "She is not his Duchess," Catherine whispered back, then immediately regretted revealing her knowledge. Sophia's eyes widened with interest. "Indeed, one might be forgiven for assuming otherwise, given their constant companionship." "I neither know nor care about the Duke's arrangements," Catherine said firmly. But she could not help noticing that Edmund stood apart from the other guests, his posture tense, his gaze occasionally seeking hers across the room. When their eyes inevitably met, he inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. Catherine merely turned her attention back to the young lady at the pianoforte. After the performance, as guests mingled during refreshments, Catherine found herself cornered by the Duchess of Harrington. "Lady Catherine," the Duchess said, her voice honeyed but her eyes sharp. "I've been hoping for a moment alone with you." Catherine curtsied. "Your Grace, I did not see you arrive. I came separately from the Duke tonight." The Duchess smiled thinly. "He seems rather distracted of late. Since Lady Rothwell's ball, in fact." Catherine maintained her composure. "I cannot imagine why that would concern me." "Can you not?" The Duchess stepped closer. "Let me be direct, my dear. Edmund and I have an understanding. He may be experiencing some nostalgia regarding your previous acquaintance, but I assure you it is nothing more." "If you have an understanding with the Duke, then it is to him you should speak," Catherine replied evenly. "Excuse me." As she attempted to move past, the Duchess caught her arm. "He will be mine," she hissed, her composure slipping momentarily. "Do not delude yourself into thinking otherwise." Before Catherine could respond, a deep voice interrupted. "Is everything all right, ladies?" Edmund stood beside them, his expression guarded, but his eyes fixed on where the Duchess's fingers dug into Catherine's arm. The Duchess immediately released her grip, her demeanor transforming. "Edmund, darling, Lady Catherine and I were just becoming better acquainted." "Were you indeed?" His tone suggested he believed otherwise. "Lady Catherine, I believe your sister is looking for you." Grateful for the excuse, Catherine nodded stiffly. "Your Grace, Duchess." She departed swiftly, her heart pounding. She had nearly reached Helena when Edmund appeared at her side. "A moment, please," he said quietly. "In the library. It's important." Catherine hesitated, then glanced toward the Duchess, who was watching them with barely concealed fury. "Very well. 2 minutes." The Forsyths' library was blessedly empty. Edmund closed the door partially, enough for propriety, but affording them some privacy. "Are you all right?" he asked immediately. "Elizabeth can be forceful when she feels challenged." "I am perfectly capable of handling the Duchess," Catherine replied, "though I fail to understand why she considers me a challenge, given your apparent understanding." Edmund's jaw tightened. "There is no understanding. Elizabeth has chosen to interpret certain courtesies as more meaningful than they are." "Your personal arrangements are none of my concern," Catherine said dismissively. "Why have you brought me here?" Edmund ran a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture that still made her heart constrict. "I visited your father yesterday." "Yes," he informed me. "Most presumptuous of you." "Catherine," Edmund's voice was strained, "I know I have no right to ask for a second chance, but I must explain what happened last year." "Must you?" Catherine folded her arms protectively across her chest. "I believe your actions made your feelings perfectly clear." "No," he said with sudden vehemence. "They did not." He took a deep breath. "When I left, it was not because I didn't care for you. It was because I cared too much." Catherine laughed incredulously. "What a novel excuse. You abandoned me because you cared too deeply. How convenient." "It's the truth," he insisted. "I received news, devastating news, that made me believe I had no right to pursue you." "What news could possibly justify such cruelty?" Catherine demanded. Edmund hesitated, then said, "I can't tell you. Not yet. But I swear to you, Catherine, I left to protect you, not to hurt you." "Protect me from what? Your affection?" She shook her head in disbelief. "You are either lying now or you were lying then. Either way, I see no reason to trust you." "I understand your skepticism," Edmund said quietly, "but I am asking, begging, for the chance to prove myself to you again." "While the Duchess awaits you in the music room?" Catherine raised an eyebrow. "I think not. Elizabeth means nothing to me," Edmund said firmly. "That charade is over." Before Catherine could respond, the library door opened fully, revealing James Howard. "Ah, there you are, Lady Catherine," he said, his gaze moving between her and Edmund. "Your sister was concerned about your absence." Catherine seized the opportunity. "Mr. Howard, how thoughtful. I was just returning to the gathering." As she moved toward James, Edmund spoke once more. "Catherine, please. One chance to explain fully." She paused, then turned back to him. "I have a prior engagement tomorrow, but I will be walking in Hyde Park the day after at 11. If you wish to speak further, you may find me there." With that, she left with James, leaving Edmund alone in the library, hope and determination warring in his expression. The morning dawned clear and crisp as Catherine prepared for her walk in Hyde Park. She had spent a restless night debating the wisdom of meeting Edmund, but curiosity, and perhaps something deeper, had won out. "Are you certain you don't want me to accompany you?" Helena asked as Catherine donned her bonnet and gloves. "Quite certain," Catherine replied. "Whatever the Duke has to say, I prefer to hear it privately." Helena frowned. "Father would not approve of you meeting him unchaperoned." "We will be in a public park in broad daylight," Catherine reminded her. "Besides, you know as well as I that Edmund would never compromise my reputation." "The same Edmund who abandoned you without explanation?" Helena asked skeptically. Catherine sighed. "I simply want answers, Helena. Nothing more." But as she entered the park and saw Edmund waiting by the ornamental lake, Catherine was forced to acknowledge that her feelings were far more complicated than a simple desire for closure. He stood tall and straight, without the usual trappings of his status. No valet, no fine carriage waiting nearby. His greatcoat was of excellent quality but understated, and he held his hat in his hands rather than wearing it, revealing hair slightly tousled by the breeze. When he spotted her, his expression transformed from anxiety to relief. "You came," he said simply. "I said I would," Catherine replied. "I keep my promises." The implied criticism was not lost on him. "Shall we walk?" They strolled in silence for several minutes, following the gravel path around the lake. Finally, Edmund spoke. "Do you remember when we first met? At Lady Winchester's dinner party?" Catherine nodded stiffly. "You were seated beside me and spoke hardly a word all evening. I thought you insufferably proud." A small smile touched his lips. "I was terrified. You were so beautiful, so self-possessed. I couldn't think of a single intelligent thing to say." "You found your voice eventually," Catherine observed, "particularly during those walks we took." "The happiest hours of my life," Edmund said quietly. Catherine stopped walking. "Why did you leave, Edmund? The truth this time." He gazed out over the water, gathering his thoughts. "It began with a letter from my former ward, Richard Phillips." "I didn't know you had a ward," Catherine said, surprised. "The son of my late cousin," Edmund explained. "I became his guardian when he was 12 after his parents died in a carriage accident." "Where is he now?" "Cambridge. He's 20 now, nearly finished with his studies." Edmund's expression darkened. Richard's letter contained disturbing news about a man named Victor Hargrove, a businessman with whom my father had significant dealings before his death. Catherine frowned. "I don't understand what this has to do with us." "Everything," Edmund said grimly. "Richard discovered evidence suggesting that Hargrove had been systematically defrauding my father for years. But worse, far worse, was the suggestion that Hargrove might have been involved in my father's death." Catherine gasped. "Your father's riding accident? But that was 10 years ago, yes." Edmund's voice was tight with controlled emotion. "The official finding was misadventure. His horse spooked and threw him. But Richard uncovered correspondence indicating my father had confronted Hargrove about financial discrepancies just days before his death." "Edmund, that's horrifying," Catherine said, genuine concern overriding her reserve. "But why didn't you tell me?" He turned to face her fully. "Because of who Victor Hargrove is. He's the Duchess of Harrington's uncle and her financial advisor." Catherine's eyes widened as the pieces began to fall into place. "So your sudden interest in Elizabeth—" "Was never interest," Edmund said firmly. "It was investigation. I needed to get close enough to discover if she was involved in her uncle's schemes." "And is she?" Edmund hesitated. "I don't believe so. Elizabeth is ambitious and calculating, but I've found no evidence linking her directly to Hargrove's crimes." Catherine processed this information slowly. "But why cut me off completely? Why not simply tell me the truth?" "Because Hargrove is dangerous," Edmund said, his voice dropping. "When I began looking into his affairs, there was an incident, a warning. My carriage was deliberately run off the road on my return from Silvermere Court. The driver was injured, though I escaped unharmed." Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. "Heavens! You might have been killed." "Indeed." Edmund's expression was grim. "And the message was clear. Hargrove knew I was investigating him, and he would stop at nothing to prevent it." "So you pushed me away to protect me," Catherine murmured, understanding dawning. "I couldn't bear the thought of you being harmed because of me," Edmund said fervently. "If Hargrove had discovered my feelings for you, you would have become a target. I thought it would be better for you to hate me than to be in danger." Catherine was silent for a long moment, absorbing his words. "You had no right to make that decision for me." "I know," Edmund admitted. "It was arrogant and misguided. But I was terrified, Catherine. Not for myself, but for you." "And now? Why tell me all this now?" "Because it's over," Edmund said with quiet triumph. 3 weeks ago, Hargrove was arrested for fraud and embezzlement. Richard and I provided the authorities with evidence of his crimes. He's currently awaiting trial, with no possibility of release." "And the suspicions about your father's death?" Edmund's expression darkened. "Still unproven, unfortunately. But Hargrove will spend the rest of his life in prison for his financial crimes, at least." Catherine digested this information slowly. "So your courting of the Duchess, a necessary deception to gain access to her household and potentially her uncle's papers," Edmund confirmed. "Not my proudest moment, but effective." "Does she know?" That I used our connection to investigate her uncle? Not explicitly, though I suspect she has realized by now. Edmund's mouth twisted wryly. Elizabeth is many things, but not a fool. They resumed walking, their pace slower, more thoughtful. I understand your reasoning, Catherine said finally, but I cannot forget the pain of your abandonment. For a year I believed I meant nothing to you. You meant everything, Edmund said with sudden passion. You still do. Every day away from you was torture, but I would endure it again if it meant keeping you safe. Catherine stopped once more, turning to face him fully. I admire your protection of Richard and your pursuit of justice for your father. But Edmund, don't you see? Your fundamental mistake was not trusting me with the truth. You made decisions about my life, about us, without giving me any choice in the matter. Edmund's shoulders slumped slightly as the truth of her words hit home. You're right. I was so focused on protecting you physically that I never considered the emotional harm I was causing. It was unconscionable. Yes, Catherine agreed. It was. Can you ever forgive me? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Catherine gazed up at him, seeing the anguish in his eyes, the genuine remorse in his expression. Forgiveness may be possible, she said carefully. Trust is harder to rebuild. A ray of hope appeared in Edmund's eyes. Then you'll allow me to try? I make no promises, Catherine warned, and if you ever deceive me again for any reason, even with the noblest intentions, we will be finished. Permanently. I understand, Edmund said solemnly. Complete honesty, always. As they continued their walk, a comfortable silence fell between them, not the easy intimacy they had once shared, but no longer the tense hostility of recent days either. When they parted at the park gates, Edmund asked, Will you be attending Lady Sinclair's dinner tomorrow evening? Yes, Catherine replied. Helena is particularly looking forward to it. Then perhaps, might I call on you beforehand? There is something I would like to show you. Documents that corroborate my story. Catherine hesitated, then nodded. Very well, 3 o'clock. As Catherine returned home, her mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Edmund's explanation made sense of his inexplicable behavior, but the wound of his abandonment had cut deep. Could she truly trust him again? Her contemplation was interrupted by the discovery that James Howard awaited her in the drawing room. Mr. Howard, she greeted him with genuine warmth, tinged with unease. This is unexpected. James rose, bowing slightly. Forgive the intrusion. I was passing and thought I might inquire if you would honor me with your company at the Sinclair dinner tomorrow. Catherine's conscience pricked her. James had been nothing but kind and attentive during her recovery from heartbreak. He deserved honesty. Mr. Howard, James, she began gently, I must be forthright with you. The Duke of Silvermere has explained certain circumstances that complicate matters. James's expression fell slightly, though he maintained his composure. I see. May I ask if these explanations have altered your feelings toward him? I'm not entirely certain, Catherine admitted. The situation is complex. James nodded slowly. I appreciate your candor, Lady Catherine. Know that my regard for you remains unchanged. Should you decide that the Duke's explanations are insufficient, I hope you will remember that not all men are so inconstant in their affections. His quiet dignity moved Catherine deeply. You are a good man, James Howard. Any woman would be fortunate to receive your attentions. After James departed, Catherine found her father in his study, intent upon some estate correspondence. Papa, she said, using the childhood address that had largely given way to the more formal father as she matured. Might I speak with you? The Earl set aside his papers, giving her his full attention. Of course, my dear. You seem troubled. Catherine took a deep breath and recounted Edmund's explanation, watching her father's expression shift from skepticism to concern to grudging understanding. When she finished, the Earl was silent for a long moment. It is a remarkable tale, he said finally, and yet I find I'm inclined to believe it. Silvermere has always been a man of honor, his recent behavior notwithstanding. He claims to have evidence, Catherine added. He's bringing it tomorrow when he calls. The Earl raised an eyebrow. You have agreed to receive him, then? To see his proof, Catherine clarified. Nothing more. Her father studied her carefully. And if his proof is convincing? What then, Catherine? I don't know, she admitted. My heart is confused. And Mr. Howard? He called earlier. Catherine sighed. He is everything kind and good, but he is not the man you love, the Earl finished gently. Catherine looked up, startled by her father's perception. I didn't say that. You didn't need to. The Earl smiled sadly. The following afternoon, Edmund arrived at the Pemberton townhouse precisely at 3 o'clock, carrying a leather portfolio. Catherine received him in the drawing room, with Helena present as propriety demanded. Your Grace, Catherine greeted him formally. Lady Catherine, Lady Helena. Edmund bowed, then gestured to the portfolio. I've brought the documents I mentioned. Helena, sensing the gravity of the moment, stood. I believe I hear Mrs. Collins calling me, if you'll excuse me. Once Helena had departed, though Catherine suspected she lingered just outside the door, Edmund opened the portfolio and spread several papers on the table between them. These are copies of correspondence between my father and Hargrove, he explained, indicating yellowing letters. Note the dates. This final letter was written 3 days before my father's death. Catherine examined the letter carefully. The late Duke's handwriting was firm and decisive, much like Edmund's, but the content was disturbing. Clear accusations of financial impropriety and a demand for a meeting. This certainly suggests a motive, she acknowledged, but is it enough to prove murder? Unfortunately not, Edmund admitted, but these, he produced newer documents, are bank records showing how Hargrove systematically embezzled funds from my family's investments over a period of years. And this, he unfolded a newspaper clipping, is the announcement of his arrest 3 weeks ago. Catherine read the clipping, which detailed charges of fraud against prominent businessman Victor Hargrove, without mentioning any connection to the Duke of Silvermere. You kept your name out of the papers, she observed. For as long as possible, Edmund agreed, though I imagine the connection will emerge during the trial. And the Duchess, how has she responded to her uncle's arrest? Edmund's expression hardened slightly. With surprising composure, she claims ignorance of his financial dealings, though she must have benefited from them. Her late husband's fortune was largely managed by Hargrove. Do you believe her? I believe she is practiced at protecting herself, Edmund said carefully. Whether through genuine ignorance or willful blindness, I cannot say for certain. Catherine considered this. She seemed quite possessive of you at the musicale. A shadow crossed Edmund's face. I allowed her to believe our connection was deeper than it was, a necessary deception to gain access to Hargrove. It was not honourable, but I felt justified in my pursuit of justice. And now, Catherine asked, she clearly believes your arrangement continues. I have made my position clear to her since Hargrove's arrest, Edmund said firmly. Any pretense of courtship is over. Catherine returned the documents to the portfolio, her mind working rapidly. Everything Edmund had shown her aligned with his explanation. Yet one question remained. Why did you not contact me once Hargrove was safely in custody? Why wait until we encountered each other at Lady Rothwell's ball? Edmund's expression turned rueful. Fear, plain and simple. I had convinced myself that you must hate me, rightfully so, and that any attempt to renew our connection would be unwelcome. When I saw you at the ball, so beautiful and apparently recovered from whatever pain I had caused, I nearly lost my nerve entirely. But you followed me to the terrace, Catherine reminded him. I couldn't help myself, Edmund admitted. Seeing you again, it was like coming home after a long, dark journey. The naked emotion in his voice touched something in Catherine's heart, but she maintained her composure. These documents support your explanation, she said carefully. But trust once broken is not easily mended. I understand, Edmund said solemnly. I ask only for the opportunity to earn your trust again, not through words, but through actions. Catherine met his gaze steadily. Actions speak louder than words indeed. We shall see what yours reveal, Your Grace. Edmund rose to leave, recognizing that he had been granted no firm promise, merely the chance to prove himself. At the drawing-room door, he paused. I shall see you at Lady Sinclair's dinner this evening. Yes, Catherine confirmed. Helena and I will be attending with Father. Until then. Edmund bowed and departed. Helena reappeared almost immediately. Well? Was his explanation satisfactory? Catherine sighed. It was plausible, and supported by evidence. So you believe him? I believe he thought he was protecting me, Catherine said carefully, but his method of protection caused great pain. Helena sat beside her sister. The question now is whether you can forgive him. Forgiveness is one thing, Catherine replied. Trust is another matter entirely. But you care for him still, Helena observed shrewdly. Catherine closed her eyes briefly. Much as I wish otherwise, yes. Later that evening, the Pemberton carriage delivered Catherine, Helena and the Earl to Lady Sinclair's elegant townhouse in Mayfair. The dinner was a relatively intimate affair by London standards. Only 20 guests gathered in the opulent dining room. Catherine found herself seated between an elderly viscount and a visiting Italian count, with James Howard directly across from her. Edmund, she noted with both relief and disappointment, was positioned at the far end of the table beside Lady Sinclair herself. Throughout the meal, Catherine maintained pleasant conversation with her dining companions, though she was acutely aware of Edmund's occasional glances in her direction. James, too, watched her with quiet attentiveness, his expression betraying his continued hope. The situation grew more complicated when the ladies withdrew to the drawing room, leaving the gentlemen to their port and cigars. The Duchess of Harrington immediately approached Catherine, her smile brittle. "Lady Catherine," she said smoothly, "such a pleasure to see you again. I understand the Duke called upon you yesterday." Catherine met the Duchess's gaze calmly. "Yes, Your Grace. He had some business matters to discuss with my father." "How interesting," the Duchess replied, her tone suggesting she believed otherwise. "Edmund has been most distracted lately. I fear his judgment may be impaired by sentiment." "The Duke strikes me as a man who knows his own mind," Catherine countered. The Duchess leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Let me be plain, my dear. Edmund and I have a long-standing arrangement that will culminate in marriage. His recent nostalgia regarding your previous acquaintance changes nothing." Before Catherine could respond, Lady Helena intervened. "Duchess, I believe Lady Sinclair is asking for your opinion on the new draperies. She values your exquisite taste." With a final, pointed look at Catherine, the Duchess glided away. "That woman is a viper," Helena muttered. "What did she want?" "To stake her claim," Catherine replied, "though I suspect it's a claim based more on wishful thinking than reality." When the gentlemen rejoined the ladies, Edmund made his way directly to Catherine's side. "May I get you some refreshment?" he asked politely. "Thank you, no," Catherine replied, conscious of the Duchess's narrowed eyes from across the room. Edmund followed her gaze. "Pay her no mind. Elizabeth's pride is wounded, but she will recover." "She seems quite convinced of your imminent engagement," Catherine observed. Edmund's expression hardened. "Then she labors under a misapprehension I have repeatedly tried to correct." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of James Howard. "Lady Catherine," he greeted her warmly, "I wonder if I might claim your attention for a moment." Edmund stiffened, but nodded politely to James, before withdrawing to speak with Lord Sinclair. "You seem troubled," James said once Edmund had moved away. "Is there anything I can do?" Catherine smiled gratefully at his concern. "You are kind, as always. But no, this is something I must resolve myself." "The Duke's explanation was satisfactory, then?" James asked, his expression carefully neutral. "It was compelling," Catherine admitted, "though trust is not so easily restored." James nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. But know that whatever you decide, I value your friendship above all." His sincere goodness made Catherine's heart ache. In a simpler world, she might have loved this man who offered such steady devotion. The evening progressed with music and conversation, but an underlying tension persisted. The Duchess continued to hover near Edmund, making her claim apparent to all observers. Edmund, for his part, maintained polite distance while seeking opportunities to speak with Catherine. When the Pembertons prepared to depart, Edmund approached Catherine once more. "Might I call on you tomorrow?" he asked quietly. "There is something I wish to discuss." Catherine hesitated, aware of the Duchess watching them intently. "I shall be home at 2 o'clock, she finally agreed. The following day brought grey skies and a persistent drizzle that matched Catherine's uncertain mood. She had spent a restless night weighing Edmund's explanation against her lingering hurt, trying to determine if her heart could risk trusting him again. At precisely 2 o'clock, Edmund was announced. He entered the drawing room with an air of determination, his greatcoat still damp from the rain. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, declining the offer of tea. "You said you had something to discuss," Catherine prompted, when he seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Edmund took a deep breath. "Yes, I've been thinking about what you said, about trust being earned through actions, not words. And I realize that I've asked you to forgive a great deal based on an explanation that, while true, came very late." Edmund paced the room, his agitation evident. "You deserve more than explanations, Catherine. You deserve certainty." "What kind of certainty?" she asked cautiously. Edmund stopped pacing and faced her directly. "I'm leaving for Silvermere Court tomorrow." Catherine blinked in surprise. "Leaving London? But the season will continue without me," he finished. "I have business at the estate that requires my attention, improvements to the tenant cottages that I've neglected during my focus on Hargrove." "I see," Catherine said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Then this is farewell." "No," Edmund said quickly. "It's an invitation." Catherine stared at him, confused. "I would like you and your family to visit Silvermere Court," Edmund clarified. "As my guests. Spend a fortnight there, see the estate, meet the people who depend on me. Judge me by how I fulfill my responsibilities, not just by my words in a London drawing room." The invitation was unexpected but intriguing. "You wish me to see you on your own ground," Catherine mused. "I wish you to see me as I truly am," Edmund corrected. "Not the London aristocrat, nor the man consumed by vengeance, but the steward of an estate that has been in my family for generations. I believe a man reveals his true character in how he treats those dependent upon him." Catherine considered his proposal. A visit to Silvermere would indeed provide insight into Edmund's character beyond the confines of London society. Moreover, it would remove them both from the Duchess's immediate sphere of influence. "I shall speak with my father," she said finally. "If he approves, we would be honored to accept your invitation." Relief flooded Edmund's features. "Thank you. I shall send formal invitations this evening, along with details of the journey." As he prepared to leave, Catherine asked one final question. "And the Duchess? What will she make of your sudden departure?" Edmund's expression was resolute. "Elizabeth's expectations are not my concern. My focus now is on proving myself worthy of your trust, Catherine. Everything else is secondary." After consulting with her father, who approved of the visit with certain stipulations regarding propriety, Catherine found herself facing a new dilemma: how to inform James Howard of their impending departure. The opportunity came the following morning when James called at the Pemberton townhouse. "You're leaving London?" he asked, his disappointment evident when Catherine explained their plans. "Only for a fortnight," she assured him. "Father believes the country air will benefit Helena, who has been somewhat pale lately." James was too perceptive to be fooled. "And the Duke's estate happens to be your chosen destination." Catherine met his gaze honestly. "Yes, I need to understand certain matters more clearly." "You're giving him another chance," James said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "I'm seeking answers," Catherine clarified. "Whether those answers lead to reconciliation or final closure remains to be seen." James nodded slowly. "I respect your honesty, Lady Catherine. Few would be so forthright." "You deserve nothing less," she replied sincerely. "Your friendship has meant a great deal to me." "And I shall remain your friend whatever you decide," James promised, though the shadow in his eyes belied the cost of that promise to him. As James took his leave, Catherine was struck by the contrast between the two men who sought her affection, one who had hurt her deeply, but whose explanation, if true, suggested a love so profound he would sacrifice his own happiness for her safety. The other who offered steady, uncomplicated devotion that had never wavered. Why then did her heart still lean toward Edmund, despite the pain he had caused? 3 days later, the Pembertons' travelling carriage departed London, bound for Silvermere Court in Derbyshire. Catherine watched the city recede, aware that she was journeying toward a decision that would shape her future. Silvermere Court rose majestically against the backdrop of rolling Derbyshire hills, its pale stone glowing warmly in the late afternoon sun. As the Pembertons' carriage approached the imposing estate, Catherine felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. This was Edmund's ancestral home, the heart of his responsibilities, and the true measure of the man he had become. "Gracious," Helena breathed, leaning forward to get a better view. "It's magnificent." The Earl nodded appreciatively. One of the finest estates in the county, by all accounts. Edmund himself met them in the grand entrance hall, dressed not in the formal attire of London, but in the practical clothing of a country gentleman. His face lit up at the sight of Catherine, though he maintained a proper distance as he welcomed them. "Lord Willowmere, Lady Catherine, Lady Helena, welcome to Silvermere Court. I trust your journey was comfortable." "Quite satisfactory, thank you," the Earl replied. "A fine property you have here, Silvermere." "Thank you, sir. It's been in my family for 15 generations." Edmund's pride was evident not in arrogance, but in his clear sense of responsibility. "I hope you'll allow me to show you some of its features during your stay." The housekeeper, Mrs. Hodges, a dignified woman in her 50s, stepped forward to escort them to their rooms. "Everything has been prepared according to His Grace's instructions. If you require anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." As Catherine followed Mrs. Hodges up the grand staircase, she caught Edmund's eye. The intensity of his gaze, hopeful, anxious, determined, reminded her of why she had accepted this invitation. She was here to discover the truth of his character, beyond words and explanations. Her chambers were spacious and elegant, with large windows overlooking the formal gardens, and beyond them the shimmering surface of the lake that gave the estate its name. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, and a fire crackled cheerfully in the grate. "His Grace selected these rooms himself, my lady," Mrs. Hodges informed her as a maid unpacked Catherine's trunks. "They have the finest view in the house, excepting the Duke's own chambers." "It's lovely," Catherine acknowledged. "Has the Duke been in residence long?" "Just 3 weeks, my lady, since his return from London, but he's accomplished more in that time than in the previous year." Mrs. Hodges' expression softened with evident approval. "Up at dawn every day, meeting with the steward, visiting the farms, overseeing the improvements to the cottages, a true master of the estate, just like his father before him." Catherine found this insight intriguing. "You knew the late Duke well?" "I've served at Silvermere Court for 30 years, my lady," Mrs. Hodges replied with quiet pride. "The late Duke was a good man, fair and thoughtful. His Grace takes after him in that regard, though perhaps with a bit more fire in his nature." After refreshing herself from the journey, Catherine joined her father and sister for dinner in the formal dining room. Edmund, as host, led the conversation with easy charm, answering the Earl's questions about estate management and discussing with Helena the history of the art collection that graced the walls. "Tomorrow, if the weather permits," Edmund said as they enjoyed dessert, "I thought we might tour the home farm and see the cottage improvements, unless you would prefer to rest after your journey?" "Not at all," the Earl responded. "I'm most interested in your agricultural methods. I understand you've implemented some innovations at Silvermere." "Modest improvements only," Edmund said modestly. "My steward, Mr. Thornton, deserves most of the credit." Catherine observed Edmund carefully throughout the evening. Here, in his ancestral home, he seemed more relaxed yet also more focused, a man comfortable with his responsibilities and genuinely invested in the welfare of his estate and its dependents. The following morning dawned clear and mild. After breakfast, Edmund provided horses for the Earl and Catherine, while Helena chose to remain at the house with Mrs. Hodges, who had offered to show her the famous Silvermere tapestries. As they rode across the estate, Edmund pointed out the boundaries, the tenant farms, and the village that depended on Silvermere for its prosperity. "We're particularly proud of the new school," he told them, indicating a sturdy stone building near the village green. "Built last year and expanded this spring to accommodate more children." "You fund education for the tenants' children?" Catherine asked, impressed. "Of course," Edmund replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "An educated workforce benefits everyone, and every child deserves the opportunity to develop their mind." The Earl nodded approvingly. "A progressive view, Your Grace. Not all landowners share it." They continued to the row of stone cottages where workmen were busy installing new windows and repairing roofs. "These improvements were long overdue," Edmund admitted as they dismounted to inspect the work more closely. "I regret that my distractions in London delayed them." An older man approached, doffing his cap respectfully. "Your Grace, my lord, my lady, the new slates for the Jenkins cottage arrived this morning." "Excellent, Thornton," Edmund replied, then turned to the Pembertons. "Allow me to introduce Mr. Thornton, my steward, and right hand in all matters concerning Silvermere." After discussing the ongoing work with Mr. Thornton, they remounted and continued their tour. Catherine noted how the tenants they encountered greeted Edmund with genuine respect and obvious affection, not the fearful deference often shown to landlords, but the warm regard given to a fair and considerate master. "You seem well loved by your people," she observed as they paused by a stream where new irrigation works were underway. Edmund looked surprised at her comment. "I wouldn't presume to say loved. I simply try to fulfill my obligations to those who depend on Silvermere for their livelihood. My father taught me that true nobility lies not in titles or wealth, but in how one uses position to benefit others." "A wise philosophy," the Earl commented, "and one not universally embraced among our peers." When they returned to the house for luncheon, Catherine found herself viewing Edmund in a new light. The dedication he showed to his estate and its people revealed a depth of character that aligned with the man she had begun to love a year ago, before his inexplicable disappearance. Over the next several days, Catherine saw more evidence of Edmund's true nature. He spent long hours with his steward, personally oversaw the care of an elderly tenant who had fallen ill, and patiently explained the estate's accounts to the Earl when the older man expressed interest. On the 5th day of their visit, Catherine was reading in the library when Edmund found her alone. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, hesitating at the door. "Not at all," she replied, setting aside her book. "I was just admiring your collection. It's quite impressive." "My mother's influence," Edmund explained, moving closer. "She was a great reader and insisted that Silvermere's library remain current, not merely a repository of ancient volumes no one ever opened." Catherine smiled at this insight into his family. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Edmund agreed, his expression softening with memory. "I think she would have liked you very much, Catherine." The casual use of her given name, the first time since their reunion, created a moment of intimacy between them. "I wanted to ask," Edmund continued, "if you would care to walk with me this afternoon. There's a particular spot by the lake I thought you might enjoy." Catherine hesitated, aware that accepting would signal a significant shift in their relationship. Yet after nearly a week at Silvermere, she found her resistance weakening. The Edmund she observed here was the man she had begun to love in London, thoughtful, intelligent, honourable, not the cold, distant figure who had broken her heart. "I would like that," she said finally. Later, as they strolled along the lakeshore, a comfortable silence fell between them. The afternoon sun dappled the water's surface, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. "This was my favourite place as a boy," Edmund said, leading her to a small, sheltered cove where an ancient oak tree spread its massive branches. "I would come here to read, to think, to escape my tutors when their lessons grew too tedious." Catherine smiled at the image of a young Edmund hiding from his responsibilities. "I had a similar retreat at Willowmere Park, a window seat in the unused east wing where no one ever thought to look for me." "We were not so different then," Edmund observed. "Perhaps not," Catherine agreed. They sat on a stone bench beneath the oak, facing the lake. For a long moment neither spoke, content in the peaceful setting and each other's company. Finally, Edmund turned to her. "Catherine, I must ask, has your time at Silvermere changed your perspective at all?" The directness of his question caught her off guard, though she had been expecting it. "I've seen much to admire," she acknowledged. "Your dedication to the estate, your concern for your tenants, your sense of responsibility. These speak well of your character." Edmund nodded, encouragement in his expression. "And as to the other matter?" Catherine sighed softly. "If you're asking whether I believe your explanation about Victor Hargrove and your reasons for leaving, yes, I do believe you were sincere in your desire to protect me." Relief flooded his features, but Catherine held up a hand to forestall his response. "However," she continued, "I still maintain that you should have trusted me with the truth. We might have found another solution together, one that didn't involve such pain." "You're right," Edmund said immediately. "It was arrogance on my part, believing I alone could make such decisions. If I could change one thing about my actions, it would be that." His humility touched her. The Edmund she had known in London had been proud, sometimes to a fault. This willingness to acknowledge his mistake revealed growth. "What would you have us be to each other now, Edmund?" Catherine asked softly. Edmund took her hand gently, giving her every opportunity to withdraw it if she wished. When she didn't, He spoke with quiet intensity. Everything we might have been before I made my grievous error. Friends, companions, confidants, and eventually, if you can find it in your heart to fully trust me again, husband and wife. The directness of his declaration took her breath away. Edmund, I am not proposing this moment, he clarified quickly. That would be presumptuous. I am merely telling you what I hope for, what I will work toward earning, if you'll allow me the chance. Catherine looked down at their joined hands, then back to his earnest face. I think I would like to allow you that chance. The joy that transformed Edmund's expression was almost painful to witness. It reminded her so vividly of their early days together, before doubt and pain had complicated their connection. That is all I ask, he said fervently. Time to prove myself worthy of your trust again. As they walked back to the house, maintaining a proper distance but with hearts considerably lighter, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. Trust, once broken, was indeed difficult to rebuild, but not impossible, especially when the foundation remained strong beneath the damage. The following days brought a deeper sense of comfort between them. They rode together in the mornings, Edmund showing Catherine his favourite places on the estate. In the evenings, he played chess with the Earl while Catherine and Helena provided music on the pianoforte and harp respectively. It was during one such evening, as Catherine played a particularly moving Beethoven sonata, that she glanced up to find Edmund watching her with such unguarded tenderness that her fingers faltered momentarily on the keys. The intensity of his gaze, the openness of his admiration, these were the qualities that had drawn her to him initially, now restored after the coldness that had preceded their separation. On the 9th day of their visit, a messenger arrived from London bearing letters for both Edmund and the Earl. As the gentlemen retired to the library to review their correspondence, Helena seized the opportunity to speak privately with her sister. "Well," she demanded once they were alone in the morning room, "are you and the Duke reconciled? The way he looks at you suggests he believes so." Catherine smiled at her sister's directness. "We are finding our way back to an understanding." "So you've forgiven him?" Helena persisted. "I believe his explanation," Catherine clarified, "and I acknowledge the honourable intentions behind his misguided actions. As for complete forgiveness, I'm not certain such things can be rushed." "But you love him still," Helena stated with the confidence of one who knew her sister well. Catherine sighed softly. "I never stopped loving him, Helena. That was the true difficulty." Their conversation was interrupted by the return of Edmund and the Earl, both wearing grave expressions. "Is something amiss?" Catherine asked, immediately concerned. The Earl handed her a letter. "From your cousin Sophia. It seems London society has noticed our absence and drawn its own conclusions." Catherine scanned the letter quickly, her cheeks flushing at Sophia's blunt recounting of the latest gossip, that the Duke of Silvermere had lured Lady Catherine Pemberton to his country estate to make amends for his previous abandonment, that an engagement announcement was imminent, and that the Duchess of Harrington was beside herself with fury at being so thoroughly displaced. "This is mortifying," Catherine murmured, returning the letter to her father. "Society will always find something to discuss," the Earl said dismissively. "I am more concerned about this." He nodded to Edmund, who held his own letter with a troubled expression. "I've received word from my solicitor," Edmund explained. "Victor Hargrove has begun his trial and there are complications." "What sort of complications?" Catherine asked anxiously. "He's making accusations, claiming that I fabricated evidence against him as revenge for a business disagreement with my father." Edmund's jaw tightened. "More concerning is that he's somehow managed to communicate with the Duchess despite his imprisonment." "Elizabeth is involved?" Catherine felt a chill of apprehension. "My solicitor believes she may be preparing to testify on her uncle's behalf," Edmund confirmed grimly, "which would require my presence in London to counter her claims." The implications hung heavily in the air. Their peaceful interlude at Silvermere would need to end. They must return to London and the complications waiting there. "When must you leave?" Catherine asked. "Tomorrow, if I'm to reach London in time for the next session of the trial," Edmund replied. "I had hoped. That is, I would be honoured if you would all return with me." The Earl considered this. "I believe that would be wise. If society is already speculating about our presence here, a return together would present a united front." Thus it was decided. Trunks were packed, arrangements made, and the following morning saw their carriages departing Silvermere Court for the journey back to London. As they travelled, Catherine reflected on how differently she felt now compared to when they had first arrived at the estate. Then she had been uncertain, wary, her heart still heavily guarded. Now, while caution remained, hope had blossomed alongside it, hope that what had been broken might truly be mended. Upon their return to London, they discovered that Sophia's letter had not exaggerated the extent of society's interest in their country sojourn. Callers descended upon the Pemberton townhouse almost immediately, ostensibly to welcome them back, but clearly seeking confirmation of the rumours. "Is it true that the Duke proposed at Silvermere?" Lady Worthington asked Catherine directly during one such call, her expression avid with curiosity. "The Duke has been a perfect gentleman and gracious host," Catherine replied evenly. "Beyond that, I have no comment on private matters." Her diplomatic response did little to discourage speculation. Invitations poured in, many specifically mentioning that the Duke of Silvermere would also be present, as if the hostesses were providing opportunities for a public announcement. More troubling was the news that the Duchess of Harrington had indeed returned to London and was making her presence felt in society circles. "She's telling anyone who will listen that you took advantage of her absence to entrench yourself with the Duke," Helena reported after returning from a morning call. "According to her, your entire visit to Silvermere was a calculated strategy to secure a proposal." Catherine's indignation flared. "That's absurd. We went at Edmund's invitation with father as chaperone. There was nothing improper about it. Society rarely concerns itself with truth when gossip is more entertaining," Helena noted wryly. Meanwhile, Edmund was occupied with the Hargrove trial, spending long hours with his solicitors and in court. He called at the Pemberton townhouse when he could, keeping them informed of developments. "Elizabeth testified today," he reported grimly during one such visit. "She portrayed her uncle as a misunderstood businessman who fell victim to my obsessive vendetta over imagined slights to my father's memory." "And was she believed?" the Earl asked. "By some, perhaps," Edmund replied. "She can be quite compelling when she wishes. But my solicitor presented bank records that speak for themselves. The financial fraud, at least, is irrefutable." Catherine, who had been listening quietly, asked, "And what of the suspicions regarding your father's death? Will those be addressed?" A shadow crossed Edmund's face. "The evidence there is circumstantial at best. My focus now is ensuring Hargrove is imprisoned for his financial crimes, which are provable beyond doubt." As the trial progressed, society's attention remained fixed on the curious triangle formed by Edmund, Catherine, and the Duchess. Rumours and counter-rumours flourished, that the Duke would announce his engagement to Catherine at the Winchesters' ball, that he had secretly reconciled with the Duchess, that he had called out a gentleman who had spoken disrespectfully of Lady Catherine. Through it all, Catherine maintained a dignified silence, neither confirming nor denying the speculation. She and Edmund had reached a private understanding during their time at Silvermere, but nothing had been formalized between them. They were, as Catherine had told Helena, finding their way back to each other, a process that required time and could not be rushed for society's entertainment. The situation came to a head at the Countess of Harrow's midsummer ball. Catherine, wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented her colouring perfectly, entered the ballroom on her father's arm, with Helena beside them. They had barely completed their greetings to their hostess when a murmur spread through the gathering. The Duchess of Harrington had arrived, resplendent in crimson, the same shade she had worn when Catherine had last seen her with Edmund at Lady Rothwell's ball, where this complicated chapter had begun. "Courage, my dear," the Earl murmured to Catherine as the Duchess made her way toward them with determined grace. "Lady Catherine," the Duchess greeted her, her smile not reaching her eyes. "How delightful to see you again. I trust your country holiday was restorative?" "Quite refreshing, thank you," Catherine replied evenly. "Silvermere Court is a magnificent estate." "Yes, I recall it well from my previous visits," the Duchess said, the implication clear in her tone. "Edmund was most attentive in showing me its particular charms." Catherine refused to rise to the bait. "His Grace is justifiably proud of his ancestral home." "Indeed." The Duchess's smile sharpened. "Speaking of His Grace, I believe he will be arriving shortly. We have much to discuss regarding recent events." Before Catherine could respond, a footman announced new arrivals and Edmund entered the ballroom. His gaze immediately sought Catherine, a smile forming as he spotted her. The Duchess, noting the direction of his attention, stiffened slightly. "If you'll excuse me," Catherine said politely, "I promised Lady Winchester I would speak with her this evening." As she moved away, she felt the Duchess's gaze boring into her back. The woman clearly considered Catherine a rival and was prepared to fight for what she believed was rightfully hers. Catherine had just reached Lady Winchester when Edmund appeared at her side. "Lady Catherine," he greeted her formally, though his eyes conveyed a warmer message. "You look beautiful tonight." "Thank you, Your Grace," she replied, acutely aware of the curious gazes directed their way. "How went the proceedings today?" Edmund's expression grew more serious. "The evidence was compelling. I believe the jury will deliver a verdict soon, perhaps as early as tomorrow. That must be a relief after such a long pursuit of justice." "It will be," Edmund agreed, "though not the complete justice I had hoped for regarding my father." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of James Howard, who had been conspicuously absent from society gatherings since the Pembertons' return from Derbyshire. "Lady Catherine," he greeted her with genuine warmth, "you are a vision this evening." "Mr. Howard," Catherine replied, pleased to see him despite the complexity his presence added to the situation. "It's been too long." James bowed to Edmund. "Your Grace, I understand congratulations may soon be in order regarding the Hargrove trial." "We remain hopeful," Edmund acknowledged, studying James with a mixture of respect and wariness. An awkward silence fell, broken by the orchestra beginning a waltz. "Lady Catherine," Edmund said, offering his hand, "would you honor me with this dance?" Aware of the many eyes upon them, including those of the Duchess and James Howard, Catherine placed her gloved hand in Edmund's. "I would be delighted, Your Grace." As they took their positions on the dance floor, Catherine noted the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Society had been waiting for a public indication of their relationship status since their return from Silvermere, and this dance would certainly be interpreted as significant. Edmund guided her skillfully through the waltz, his hand warm and secure at her waist. Despite the crowded ballroom, Catherine felt as though they were somehow alone, cocooned in the music and the rhythm of their steps. "You've been avoiding me these past few days," Edmund said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Not avoiding," Catherine corrected, "merely giving you space to focus on the trial. It seemed more important than other matters." Edmund's gaze was intense. "Nothing is more important to me than setting things right between us, Catherine." Her heart quickened at his words, but she maintained her composure. "And the Duchess? She seems quite determined to stake her claim." "Elizabeth has no claim," Edmund said firmly. "I've made that abundantly clear to her, though she chooses not to accept it." "She told me of her visits to Silvermere," Catherine said carefully. "She implied a certain intimacy between you." Edmund's expression darkened. "She visited once with her uncle before I began investigating Hargrove. Any implied intimacy exists solely in her imagination." As the dance ended, Edmund retained her hand a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Catherine, there is something I must ask you." But his words were cut short by the arrival of the Duchess herself, who approached with the air of one reclaiming her territory. "Edmund, darling," she purred, placing a possessive hand on his arm. "You promised me this next dance, remember?" Edmund's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I made no such promise, Elizabeth." The Duchess's smile remained fixed, though her eyes hardened. "Perhaps I misunderstood. Nevertheless, Lady Harrow was just saying how delightful it would be to see us dance together, for old time's sake." Catherine, recognizing the awkward position Edmund was in, stepped back slightly. "I should return to my father in any case. Thank you for the dance, Your Grace." Edmund looked as though he might protest, but propriety demanded otherwise. With a slight bow to Catherine, he reluctantly allowed the Duchess to lead him back to the dance floor. Catherine watched them for a moment. The Duchess radiant in her triumph, Edmund stiff with barely concealed irritation, before making her way to where her father stood with Lord Winchester. "Catherine, my dear," the Earl said as she approached, "I was just discussing with Lord Winchester the possibility of extending our stay in London through August. What do you think?" The question caught her by surprise. "I thought we planned to return to Willowmere Park after the season's end." "Plans can change," the Earl replied meaningfully, his gaze shifting briefly to where Edmund danced with the Duchess. "There may be reasons to remain in town a while longer." Catherine understood her father's implication. Despite the gossip and speculation, no formal understanding had yet been established between her and Edmund. If she wished to see where their renewed connection might lead, remaining in London would be necessary. "I defer to your judgment, father," she said diplomatically. The Earl smiled knowingly. "Very well, we shall stay through August at least." Later that evening, as Catherine stood with Helena near the refreshment table, James Howard approached them. "Lady Helena, might I borrow your sister for a brief promenade around the room?" he asked. Helena, ever perceptive, nodded graciously and engaged Lady Forsyth in conversation, allowing Catherine and James a moment of relative privacy. "You seem happy," James observed as they walked slowly along the perimeter of the ballroom. "Happier than when you left for Derbyshire." Catherine glanced at him, touched by his genuine concern for her well-being, despite his obvious feelings. "I am more at peace, perhaps." "The Duke has made amends, then?" "We have reached a better understanding," Catherine acknowledged, "though much remains unresolved." James nodded thoughtfully. "And the Duchess? She appears determined to cause difficulty." "Yes," Catherine sighed, "though Edmund insists there is nothing between them." "For what it's worth," James said after a moment, "I believe him. I've observed them together this evening. She pursues, he retreats. It's quite obvious to anyone paying attention." Catherine was surprised by this support from an unexpected quarter. "That's perceptive of you, James." He smiled ruefully. "I may be biased in your favour, Lady Catherine, but I am not blind. The Duke looks at you the way—" He paused, then continued quietly. "The way I imagine I look at you, with admiration, respect, and profound attachment." The honest admission touched Catherine deeply. "James, Please," he interrupted gently. "No explanations are needed. I told you before that your friendship matters to me above all. That remains true." Catherine impulsively squeezed his hand. "You are a good man, James Howard. I am fortunate to know you." As they completed their circuit of the room, they encountered Edmund, who had finally extricated himself from the Duchess's company. His expression was carefully neutral as he observed their joined hands, though Catherine quickly released her hold on James. "Your Grace," James greeted him cordially. "I was just returning Lady Catherine to her sister's side." "Mr. Howard," Edmund acknowledged, his gaze shifting between them. "Might I have a word with Lady Catherine afterward?" "Of course," James replied, bowing slightly to Catherine before departing with impeccable grace. Once they were relatively private, Edmund spoke quietly but intently. "I apologize for the interruption earlier. The Duchess can be persistent." "So I've observed," Catherine replied, unable to keep a hint of dryness from her tone. Edmund's expression softened. "Catherine, what I was trying to ask before—" "Not here," she interrupted gently, aware of the curious glances directed their way. "Too many eyes, too many ears." Edmund nodded in understanding. "Tomorrow, then? Would you walk with me in the park? Early, before the fashionable hour." Catherine considered the request. A morning walk would afford them privacy while remaining proper with the presence of other early visitors and gardeners. "Yes," she agreed. "At 9? 9 it is," Edmund confirmed, relief evident in his features. "Until tomorrow, then." The following morning dawned bright and clear. Catherine dressed with particular care in a walking dress of pale blue muslin, simple yet elegant. Helena helped arrange her hair, a knowing smile playing about her lips. "You think he means to propose today, don't you?" she asked, as she secured a final pin. "I think he means to speak privately," Catherine corrected, though a flutter of anticipation stirred in her chest. "What will be said remains to be seen." Helena's expression grew serious. "And if he does propose? What will you answer?" Catherine met her sister's gaze in the mirror. "I don't know, Helena. My heart says one thing, my caution another." "For what it's worth," Helena said thoughtfully, "I believe he truly loves you. The way he looks at you, it's as if the sun rises and sets with you alone." Touched by her sister's romantic observation, Catherine smiled. "When did my practical little sister become such a poet?" "Perhaps I've been reading too many novels," Helena laughed, adjusting a curl at Catherine's temple. "There, you look perfect." Edmund was waiting when Catherine arrived at the park, his tall figure instantly recognizable even at a distance. As she approached, she noted that he seemed unusually tense, his posture rigid and his expression preoccupied. "Good morning," she greeted him. "Is something wrong? You seem troubled." "Catherine," He took her hands, propriety momentarily forgotten in his agitation. "I've just come from my solicitor. The jury has reached a verdict in Hargrove's case." "So quickly?" Catherine was surprised. "What was the outcome?" "Guilty on all charges of fraud and embezzlement," Edmund replied, satisfaction evident in his tone. "He's to be imprisoned for 15 years. "That's wonderful news," Catherine said warmly. "You must be relieved." "I am," Edmund agreed, "but there's more. During final testimony yesterday, new evidence emerged, evidence I wasn't aware of until this morning." "Regarding your father's death?" Catherine guessed, noting the mixture of emotions playing across Edmund's features. "Yes." Edmund guided her to a secluded bench beneath a spreading elm tree. One of Hargrove's former clerks came forward. He testified that Hargrove had paid a groom to tamper with my father's saddle before his fatal ride. Catherine gasped. So it truly was murder, not an accident. Not precisely murder in the legal sense. The clerk couldn't prove Hargrove intended death rather than injury, but certainly criminal interference that resulted in death. Edmund's voice was tight with controlled emotion. "The groom in question died years ago, so his testimony is lost, but the clerk's evidence was enough to add a charge of criminal negligence causing death to Hargrove's sentence." "Oh, Edmund," Catherine squeezed his hands. "I'm so sorry about your father, but grateful that justice has finally been served." Edmund nodded, his expression clearing slightly. "It feels like the conclusion of a chapter that's been unfinished for too long. My father can rest easier now, and I—" He paused, meeting her gaze directly. "I can look to the future instead of the past." The significance of his words hung in the air between them. Catherine felt her heart quicken as Edmund shifted to face her more directly. "Catherine, when I began investigating Hargrove, I allowed that pursuit to overshadow everything else in my life, including what was most precious to me." His voice deepened with emotion. "I convinced myself I was protecting you by pushing you away, but in truth, I was protecting myself from the terror of loving someone so completely that losing them would destroy me." "Edmund," Catherine began, but he gently placed a finger to her lips. "Please, let me finish. I need to say this properly." He took a deep breath. "These past weeks, seeing you again, explaining myself, spending time together at Silvermere, have shown me what truly matters. Justice for my father was important, yes, but not at the cost of happiness, of connection, of love." He released her hands only to reach into his coat and withdraw a small velvet box. Catherine's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a ring of exceptional beauty, a central sapphire surrounded by diamonds set in platinum. "This was my grandmother's," Edmund explained softly. "It has been passed down through generations of Silvermere duchesses. I can think of no one more worthy to wear it than you." With perfect grace, he slid from the bench to one knee before her, heedless of the dew-dampened grass. "Catherine Elizabeth Pemberton, I have loved you from the moment I first saw you, though I was too tongue-tied to speak. I have loved you through our separation, though I foolishly believed distance would diminish the feeling. I will love you for all the days of my life if you will do me the profound honor of becoming my wife." Tears shimmered in Catherine's eyes as she looked down at Edmund, this proud, complicated man who had hurt her deeply and then worked tirelessly to make amends. In his face, she saw not only love and hope, but also vulnerability and the fear of rejection. "Before I answer," she said gently, "I need to know one thing. If faced with similar circumstances again, a threat, a danger, a difficult choice, would you make decisions that affect us both alone, or would you trust me to stand beside you?" Edmund's gaze never wavered. "I would trust you with everything, my fears, my doubts, my vulnerabilities. I have learned that true protection comes not from pushing away those we love, but from standing together against whatever challenges arise." His answer, so honest and complete, dissolved the last of Catherine's reservations. "Then yes, Edmund Ashford, I will marry you. Not because you are a duke, or because society expects it, but because I love you, the man you truly are beneath the title." Joy transformed Edmund's features as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to sit beside her once more. With tender reverence, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, a kiss that spoke of promises kept and a future shared. When they finally parted, Catherine smiled through happy tears. "We should return. Father will be waiting for your formal request." Edmund nodded, helping her to her feet. "And after that?" I thought perhaps we might announce our engagement at Lady Winchester's dinner tomorrow evening." "That seems fitting," Catherine agreed, "though I imagine the Duchess will not take the news well." Edmund's expression turned serious. "Elizabeth has already departed London. My solicitor informed me this morning that she left for her country estate immediately after hearing the verdict in her uncle's case. I suspect we've seen the last of her in society circles for some time." Relief washed over Catherine. While she had never truly doubted Edmund's feelings, the Duchess's persistent presence had been a shadow over their renewed connection. As they walked back through the park, arm in arm, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, heartbroken and bewildered by Edmund's abandonment, she could never have imagined that they would find their way back to each other. That explanation, understanding, and forgiveness would heal what had been broken. Yet here they were, bound not only by love but by a deeper appreciation for what that love entailed. Trust, honesty, partnership in all things. The Earl received their news with evident satisfaction, granting his blessing immediately. "I've watched you these past weeks, Silvermere," he said as Edmund made his formal request. "You've proven yourself a man of principle and integrity, despite past mistakes. I entrust my daughter's happiness to you gladly." Helena, upon hearing the news, embraced her sister with unrestrained joy. "I knew it. From the moment he looked at you at Lady Rothwell's ball, I knew this day would come." The announcement at Lady Winchester's dinner the following evening created precisely the sensation they had anticipated. Congratulations poured in, along with knowing smiles from those who claimed to have suspected all along that a reconciliation was imminent. James Howard approached the newly engaged couple with genuine goodwill, though Catherine detected a hint of sadness behind his smile. "I wish you both every happiness," he said sincerely. "You deserve it, Lady Catherine." "Thank you, James," she replied warmly. "Your friendship means a great deal to us both." In the weeks that followed, preparations for the wedding consumed much of Catherine's time. Edmund suggested a ceremony at Silvermere Court's ancient chapel, followed by celebrations that would include not only London society, but the estate tenants and villagers as well. "I want everyone who depends on Silvermere to share in our happiness," he explained, "and to meet their future Duchess." Catherine was touched by his inclusivity. "That sounds perfect, a true beginning to our life together." On a golden autumn day in October, exactly 1 year and 4 months after Edmund had first disappeared from Catherine's life, they stood together before the altar of Silvermere Chapel. Catherine wore a gown of ivory silk with delicate lace that had belonged to her mother, while Edmund cut a striking figure in formal attire. As they spoke their vows, promises of love, fidelity, and partnership, Catherine felt the last vestiges of past hurt dissolve, replaced by the certainty that what had once been broken had been remade stronger than before. "I, Edmund James Ashford, take thee, Catherine Elizabeth Pemberton, to be my wedded wife." Edmund's voice was steady and clear, his gaze never leaving hers. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health to love and to cherish, till death us do part." When Catherine repeated her vows, her voice rang with equal conviction. This was no fairy tale ending, but the beginning of a partnership founded on mutual respect, understanding, and a love tempered by challenge and adversity. After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers in the great hall of Silvermere Court, Edmund leaned close to whisper in her ear. "Are you happy, Your Grace?" he asked, using her new title with evident pleasure. Catherine smiled up at him, her heart full. "Completely, though I suspect our greatest happiness still lies ahead." "Indeed," Edmund agreed, his eyes alight with love and promise. "We have a lifetime to discover it together." Later, as twilight softened the Derbyshire landscape, the Duke and Duchess of Silvermere slipped away from the celebrations to stand together on the terrace overlooking the lake that had witnessed their reconciliation months earlier. "When I saw you again that night at Lady Rothwell's ball," Edmund mused, his arm around Catherine's waist, "I never dared hope we would end here." "Nor I," Catherine admitted. "But perhaps we needed that time apart, that pain, to truly understand what we mean to each other." Edmund turned to face her fully, framing her face with gentle hands. "I will spend every day of our lives ensuring you never regret giving me a second chance." "And I," Catherine replied, "will ensure you never feel you must face any challenge alone again." As they sealed this promise with a kiss, the first stars appeared above Silvermere Court, witnesses to a love that had overcome betrayal, separation, and doubt to emerge stronger and more enduring than before. 5 years later, the nursery at Silvermere Court was awash in morning sunlight as Catherine entered to find her husband cradling their infant son, James Henry Ashford, while their 3-year-old daughter Eleanor solemnly presented her father with a wooden horse. "It's for baby James," she explained with the grave importance only a child can muster, "so he can practice for when he's big enough to ride Pepper." Edmund accepted the offering with equal seriousness. "A thoughtful gift, Eleanor. Your brother will treasure it when he's older." Catherine smiled from the doorway, her heart full at the sight of her family. The past 5 years had brought challenges, certainly. The management of a vast estate, the expectations placed upon a duchess, the delicate balance of public duties and private life. But through it all, she and Edmund had maintained the partnership they had promised each other on their wedding day. "Good morning," she said, moving into the room to kiss Eleanor's forehead and stroke James's downy head. "I see the nursery is already quite busy." "Papa was telling stories," Eleanor informed her importantly, "about when you and he didn't like each other and then did again." Catherine raised an eyebrow at Edmund, who had the grace to look slightly abashed. "A highly edited version," he assured her, "appropriate for young ears." "I should hope so," Catherine laughed, lifting James from his father's arms. "The unabridged tale might give her rather dramatic ideas about romance." "I like the part where Papa had to say sorry lots of times," Eleanor declared, climbing onto her father's lap. "And you made him wait and wait before you said yes." "Wise woman, your mother," Edmund told his daughter, his eyes meeting Catherine's over Eleanor's head, with a warmth that still made her heart skip. Later that afternoon, as they walked together through the improved village that now boasted not only a school, but a small hospital and a library, all funded by the Duke and Duchess's modernization efforts, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "I received a letter from Helena today," she told Edmund as they strolled arm in arm. "She and Lord Weston have set a date for their wedding at last, June next year." "Excellent news," Edmund replied, "though I'm surprised it took him so long to persuade her." Catherine smiled, remembering her sister's determination to ensure her suitor's character was thoroughly proven before accepting his proposal. "Helena learned from my experience, I think. She wanted certainty. And has she found it?" "She believes so," Catherine said thoughtfully. "Though, as we know, certainty in matters of the heart is never absolute. There is always an element of faith involved." Edmund squeezed her hand where it rested on his arm. "Faith well placed in your case, I hope." "The best decision I ever made," Catherine assured him, despite the rather dramatic beginning. They paused at the village green, where children played under the watchful eyes of mothers and nursemaids. Among them was a familiar face, Mrs. Jenkins, whose cottage had been among the first Edmund had improved when they visited Silvermere together 5 years earlier. "Your Grace," the woman greeted them warmly, curtsying. "We were just saying what a blessing the new doctor has been. My Tommy's cough is much improved since he prescribed that syrup." "I'm delighted to hear it," Catherine replied sincerely. "Dr. Parker came highly recommended from London. The Duke was most insistent that Silvermere should have the very best medical care available. And we're grateful for it, Your Grace," Mrs. Jenkins said, her weathered face creasing in a smile. "As we are for all the changes these past years." As they continued their walk, Edmund remarked, "I sometimes wonder what my father would make of all this, the school, the hospital, the modern farming methods." "I think he would be proud," Catherine said gently. "You've honored his memory not just by bringing his betrayer to justice, but by building something meaningful with the legacy he left you." Edmund nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And none of it would have been possible without you. Your vision for what Silvermere could become has transformed not just the estate but me as well." Catherine smiled up at him. "We transformed each other, I think. That's what partnership means." As they crested the hill overlooking the lake and the grand house beyond it, Edmund stopped, turning to face her fully. "Do you ever think about that day at Lady Rothwell's ball?" he asked, "when our eyes met across the room and everything else seemed to fade away?" "Often," Catherine admitted. "It was a turning point, though I didn't recognize it then. I knew in that moment that I had made the greatest mistake of my life in leaving you," Edmund said quietly, "and that I would do whatever was necessary to earn a second chance." Catherine reached up to touch his cheek, her heart full of the love that had deepened and matured through years of shared joys, challenges, and growth. Some would say we were fortunate, she mused. That few who are parted as we were find their way back to each other. Not fortune, Edmund corrected her gently. Choice. Every day we choose each other anew. That's the true meaning of till death us do part. Not a single vow made once, but a promise renewed with each sunrise. As the afternoon light gilded Silvermere Court in the distance, the Duke and Duchess stood together on the hillside, their shared past behind them, their future stretching out before them, a future built on honesty, trust, and a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger for the trial. I choose you today, Catherine said softly, echoing the private renewal they had made a tradition on each anniversary. And all the days to come. And I choose you, Edmund replied, drawing her close, today and always. Together they turned toward home where their children awaited, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them as they had faced all others, side by side, hand in hand, hearts aligned in perfect understanding. The end. Dear listeners, we hope you've enjoyed another unforgettable story. If by the end of this journey your heart feels lighter, your soul more at peace, and your spirit gently uplifted, then we've done our job well. Every tale we share is lovingly crafted to offer you not just romance, but also a moment of rest, reflection, and hope. We always aim to contribute something positive through our stories, and we're so grateful to have you with us. Thank you for being here. Until our next story, with all our gratitude. Legends of the Fall Team. Thank you, dearest listeners, for staying with us until the very end. We hope this story brought you a sense of peace, romance, and emotional renewal. From the depths of our hearts, thank you for your support. Every like, comment, and subscription inspires us to keep telling more stories of love, redemption, and second chances. If this tale moved you, please consider sharing it with someone who needs a moment of warmth and hope today. And don't go just yet. At the end of this video, you'll find a new story recommendation waiting for you. Click it and let yourself be swept away once more. With love and gratitude, the Legends of the Fall Team.